Did you just buy a gas station business and now finding out that even with high sales volume, the business is not generating enough profit for you? Or are you struggling to just meet your basic business expenses? Or are you about to buy a business that will put you in red? Some of our listeners have just found themselves in that exact situation. So stay tuned and let's analyze all that in this episode.
Welcome to the one and only Gas Station Business 101 podcast, where you can learn all the secrets about how to start and operate a gas station business successfully and make money. This podcast is brought to you by the good folks at CSB Academy Publishing Company. And now, here is your host, Shabbir Hossain.
Welcome to Gas Station Business 101 podcast. I'm your host, Shabbir Hossain, and this is episode number 49. This is the show where we discuss how to start, run, and grow a gas station business successfully. And I give you all the inside look at many different real-life case studies so you can follow and become successful in your own business. Today's episode, is a direct response to 3 of our podcast listeners and the issues they're facing in their new business ventures. I won't mention their name because I did not ask for their permission. Since I will be sharing some sales data to keep their privacy intact, I've decided not to mention any of their names. But these 3 individuals will know because I notified them via email to listen to this episode because 2 of those people are waiting for my answer. So here is the answer for those 3 individuals along with all of you that are about to buy a business or already bought a business and now you're having problem with your expenses and your profit margin. Since I'm not mentioning any names, I will be referring to them as person A, B, and C. Now, here's the situation. Person A recently sent me an email where he mentioned he recently bought a business, but now, a month and a half later, he is still putting money into the bank just to meet his expenses. Person B, on the other hand, sent me an email with a lot of sales data from a store he is thinking about buying and asked for my advice. And lastly, person C just sent me an email which said he followed my advice that I gave on various podcast episodes and bought a business. But now he sees 2 of the categories in his business has less profit margin than what I suggested they should have. And these 2 categories are automotive and cigarettes, where he said my suggestions were 15 to 17% on cigarettes, but he found on his new business it has only 5% margin. And in the automotive category, my suggestion was around 50%, but he saw it at his store, it's around 18% margin. But what is even worse in his case is that his cigarette sales are 37% of his total combined merchandise sales. So if he sold $100 worth of merchandise in one day, $37 out of that 100 is just on cigarettes, which has only 5% margin. So that is an alarming thing. But let's talk and see what we can do to mitigate our loss and make sure that we do not find ourselves in this type of situations. Now, do any of you remember listening to my episode number 1 and then again episode number 33? In these 2 episodes, I shared my own life story and how I failed miserably in my first gas station business venture and how I was taken for a fool by the sellers. And I'm not suggesting that this is what has happened to these 3 gentlemen. Of course, one of them didn't even buy the business yet. But I wanted to mention my own failure so some of you can relate to that and understand how serious it is to analyze before you buy analyze data, that is. It is very important that you analyze every aspect of it. Like person C said, he followed my advice, but I believe he overlooked the percentage, which is the cigarette profit margin, which is 5% compared to, let's say, 15 to 17%. I'm sure he overlooked it because it is a big piece of a puzzle that most likely he missed. But I don't think that's the end of the rope for him. I mean, there are things that we can do and still survive and make a little bit of money. And I will talk to you all about that. But let's start with person A first. In his case, he's not sure why he's not making any money. In last 2 weeks, we have shared a lot of sales and purchase data. And I sent few emails back and forth with him where I asked for different datas and different sales figures so I could analyze and share those with you in this episode. Here are his numbers, and since I did not share his name, I will share the numbers. This way his privacy won't be compromised. Last month, these were his sales. Fuel, he sold 67,457 gallons. Merchandise, he sold $71,239. Out of the 67,000 gallons, he sold 61,900 gallons of regular fuel and 5,100 gallons of premium and plus grade fuel. The breakdown on his merchandise were, and I rounded off the sales figures, so if you're listening, you don't have to worry about decimal points and all that. So I rounded it off these figures as much as I could. His department sales for cigarette was 27,000, and I will estimate at the profit margin that he should have, which let's do that first. As you know, that in various episodes I talked about how much percentage of profit margin you should have in various categories of product. So let's look at what he should have. Then we'll talk about what he has actually right now. So cigarettes, he sold $27,000 of the cigarettes, and at 15% margin, the gross profit should have been $4,050. Beer, he sold $16,000. And at 23% margin, the profit should have been $3,680. Soda, he sold $12,000. And at 33%, the gross profit should have been $3,960. Grocery, he sold $9,000 worth. And at 35% margin, the profit should have been $3,150. Tobacco, he sold $3,000. And at 23% margin, his profit should have been $690. Novelty, it's one of his departments. He sold $2,500 worth of novelty products. And at 40% margin, his profit should have been about $1,000. And automotive, he sold $1,000. And at 50% margin, his profit should have been $500. And he has a very limited deli where he sells cold sandwiches that are pre-packaged, pre-made, and he buys it from his grocery company. He sold $500 worth of sandwiches. So at 35% margin, his profit should have been $175. So if you add all that up, his sales, as I said, were $71,000. I rounded it off. And estimated gross profit should have been $17,205. And here, if you divide that, you will find out the gross profit margin for this store with my profit margin suggestions should have been right around 24%, which is not very high and not too low. My goal and our goal should always be to stay at least 24%, maybe as high as 25%. Now, if your store or the store you're looking to buy sells a lot more tobacco and cigarettes, which are low profit margin items, then your profit margin may dip down to 21 to 22%. But that is when we struggle. So our goal should be to increase the profit margin by bringing in some other items or introduce some other categories, even food, like I spoke in previous episode where you can start a deli business. And if you remember my episodes a few months ago where I talked about how to start some mini businesses inside your gas station business so you can earn extra revenue, In those 2 episodes, I suggested 10 different small mini businesses that you can start. And those are the items, those are the business ideas that can increase your profit margin by at least 2 to 3, maybe 4%. So if you are doing, let's say, 22%, by adding something with a high profit margin item that sells, you can increase your overall profit margin from 22 to 26 even. And that can have a huge impact on your bottom line. Okay, let's get back to person A again. As I said, his sales were 71,000 and my estimate was that his gross profit should have been $17,205, which should have been right at 24%. Now, the real numbers were, for the same month, he purchased $62,500 of the merchandise, which seems high for $71,000 sales. Now, remember this. It also ties into your inventory level. So, if, for example, his inventory that he started with at month 1, let's say on the first day of the month, if he started with, let's say, $60,000 of the inventory, and at the end of the month, which is beginning of the next month, exactly 30 or 31 days later, beginning of the next month, he counts his inventory once again, and he sees that he still holds right around $60 or $59 or $61,000 of the inventory, then we can say the inventory remained the same, but he bought more items he bought more merchandise, but he sold less. So there is a problem, because all you have to do is simply take the whole sales figure, which is 71,000, and deduct the purchase amount. As long as your inventory remains pretty much the same, which in most stores you will see the inventory doesn't go up from 60 to 80,000 and then drop it down to 20 or 40,000. In my years of experience, I've seen inventories do not jump up and down by a huge margin. So if it is a jump of $1,000 or less by, let's say, $1,000 or $1,500 or $2,000 even, I assume the inventory pretty much remain the same. So if that is the case, all you do is take the sales figure and then deduct your monthly purchase out of that, and that is your gross profit. And then once you do that, then you can see how much you should have made versus how much you really made. And now we already know how much he should have made. He should have made $17,205. Gross profit, that is. So if we deduct that money from our sales figure, which is actual sales, which was 71,000, then his purchase should have been $53,795. But see, he bought $62,500. So there is a difference of almost $9,000. Why is that? So first, I have to assume that he's holding on to extra $9,000 of the inventory. So I sent him an email. I asked him to check his inventory, count it, and give me a count. And he sent me an email back that said that his inventory hasn't increased. He thinks it has increased most likely by $500. So that is not the case. At first, as I said, there are times it can happen when you start a new business, because some of the vendors come in and say, if you buy 100 cases of this or 100 cases of that, I'll give you a better deal. And without knowing that you may hold on to that inventory for months, a lot of people make that mistake and jump high and buy a lot of stuff. And then their inventory level goes up all of a sudden. So in his case, if that was the case, then everything is fine, because from next month and on, it should even out, because next month he will buy much less because he's holding on to extra $9,000 of the inventory. But in his case, the red flag was that is not the case. He is not holding onto extra inventory. Since then, I drew 3 conclusions that could happen to his business. 1, his profit margins are lower than what he estimated. Number 2, he's having massive amount of theft, because $9,000 is not petty theft. It's quite a bit of money for somebody to walk away with in 1 month. And I'm sure they're not walking away with his money. Most likely it would be merchandise. So that's a lot of merchandise to be walking off in just 30 days. And number 3 outcome would be, or possibility would be, the combination of the two. Means he most likely is having theft along with low profit margin. So after I had concluded these three outcomes, I asked him to investigate and tell me what are his profit margins by each department and categories. He came back a few days later and informed me that his cigarettes were off by 4%, meaning when my suggestion was that cigarettes should be at about 15 to 17%, he says he's down by 4%. So I'm guessing his cigarette margin is right around 11%. Beer was off by 3%. Tobacco was off by 5%. And these are off means down compared to what I suggested. And automotive was off by 6%. And the novelty was off by 10%. See, novelty I usually estimate right at 40%. Novelty is one of those items that you don't sell a lot of every day, but when you do, you should make good money. And when I say novelty, novelties are the t-shirts, the baseball caps, and a lot of the lighters that are Zippos and more expensive type lighters, with the football team's logo on top of it or whatever. And one of those lighters can cost $20 to the customers. So any of these things are novelty that are not sold every day, but when you do, you should make enough money. Well, my suggestion was that he should make 40% on that, but he says he's off by 10%. So I'm guessing he's making 30% on that. Only, he said, daily margin was higher than my estimation, which was at 45% instead of the estimate that I have, which is at 35%. And rest of the categories were pretty much the same as I predicted, including soda and all that. So the new calculation, what I did is based on his figures or margin percentage, I did another calculation. And this is how the new calculation looks. And by the way, since I'm quoting a lot of numbers and you can visualize it because you're listening to me, in the event you want to see how these numbers look, all you have to do is go to my site, gasstationbusiness101.com, and on the very front page, the landing page, you will see episode number 49. But if you're logging in maybe months down the road, all you have to do is hit on top of the menu, hit podcast and go to episode 49 and look at the show notes, because I will have all these on there so you can see it for yourself. Now, let's get back to the point. So the new calculation that I did based on his margin is this. Cigarette, $27,000, remember? At 11%, his gross profit was $2,970. Beer, $16,000. At 20%, gross profit, $3,200. Soda, $12,000. At 33%, since he said rest of the categories are pretty much the same as I predicted, so I assume soda is right around 33% like I predicted. So the profit should remain the same on that category, which is $3,960. Grocery, $9,000 sales at 35% margin would be same as last time what I said, $3,150. Tobacco, $3,000 at 18% would be $540. Novelty, $2,500 worth of sales at 30%. Remember, novelty is down by 10%. So at 30%, the profit would have been $750. Automotive at $1,000. Sales at 44% margin should be $440. Deli, $500 at 40% margin should be $200. So again, remember the sales were $71,000. Actual gross profit is $15,210. Now we know the actual profit because we know the margin on each category. So the gross profit margin for his store is right around 21%. All I did is I divided that and figured out what his gross profit margin is. And that is low. That is very low. As I said, when I estimated, it was at 24%, but 21% is very low. So remember the difference we had, which was almost $9,000. To be exact, it was $8,705. That was the difference between his purchase and whatever I calculated. as far as it is inventory. Now, since we know the real numbers, let's figure out the exact difference. Because the amount, remember, according to my estimate, the profit should have been $17,205. But since he gave me the real profit margin, his actual profit for last month came to $15,210. So if I subtract that $15,210 from $17,205, the difference comes to $1,995. So when I first said that his inventory difference was about $9,000, which actual number was $8,705, but that's not the case anymore. Now we know the real numbers. So all we have to do is take 8705 minus 1995. So his actual number that he is short by, that is $6,710. So the amount, the magic number here is $6,710. Well, his profit margin is a little bit lower than what it should have been, but he should not be putting money into his bank account, because this profit margin with that sales should still generate enough for him to get by. But now we know $6,700 of the inventory is missing, because as I said, he did not add anything to his inventory, but in reality, this $6,700 is missing out of his store. So my final prediction in his case is he's having a serious case of theft and a little bit of margin issue. The margin issue is negligible because, as we know, he has to raise it by a couple of more percentage. But that's not why he's missing $6,700. He's missing that money because he's having theft. Some of his employees, maybe it's vendors, or maybe it's external theft. We don't know that. I don't know that. He has to figure that out. So in all reality, products are walking off the store without being paid. And that's the situation in his case. Okay, let's move on to person B, who sent me an email with a lot of sales data. And since he hasn't bought his store yet, I have decided not to share any of that here, not the sales figures even. But what I want to share with you is that he found a good store and the sales and profit margins both look great. The store is selling right around 80,000 gallons of fuel every month, while the merchandise sales are right around 75,000, with combined gross profit margin is around 26%. You see, remember when I calculated, even with the estimated profit margin that I suggested, it came out to 24%. But with this person B, the store that he's looking at, it is in a rural area, and I calculated that profit margin along with him, and we came up to that same conclusion, that that store is making 26% gross profit margin, which is astronomical, which is really, really great, because it gives you a lot of room to play with. If you need to run some aggressive promotion to increase sales, you can, because you have the room to do it. But when your profit margin is even 20 to 21%, you're already squeezed hard enough. So it's hard for you to go out and promote the store with pricing promotional strategies, because then you have to reduce it even more, and that would squeeze your bottom line even more. So in this case, I'm happy, and I advised him the same, that he needs to jump and not walk. He needs to buy that store as soon as he possibly can, because 26% margin is astronomical, especially with that high of a sales. And when I say high, it's not that high, but it's decent. See, one thing always remember, you can buy a store that's doing $100,000 a month or $150,000 a month merchandise sales. But if that store is only generating 17, 18, 19% profit margin, then you're not generating that much. Compared to a store that's doing $80,000 of merchandise sales with 26% margin, you would end up making more money. Why? Because the store that's doing 130 or 140 will have you spend more money on labor, because most likely you will have two cash registers running. You will have to have a third person that's taking care of the store side, where they're stocking the beer side, the cooler side, the soda, the merchandising, because it's a busy store. But when your profit margin is low, you will end up spending more money on labor and end up making less for yourself compared to a store that's doing 75, 80,000 with higher profit margin, because only one cash register will run, one cashier will work, and you don't have to have a third person or second person all the time on a shift to just stock the cooler or stock the merchandise and all that, because your manager or yourself can do it in a couple hours every day and be done with it. And it's less headache at the same time. So again, the advice I gave person B is that he needs to buy that store as soon as possible. If he hasn't signed up with a purchase agreement, or if he hasn't done that, he needs to meet with the seller and have them sign a purchase agreement, and he needs to put some money down as an earnest money deposit so the ball can start rolling. And I advised him to follow some of the previous episodes where I talked about how to close a business and what to do and what to look for and whatnot. And I'm sure he will do that, and I wish him all the luck in buying that business that's generating quite a bit of money. Now, let's talk about person C. And this is the last email that I received in this same situation. In his case, as I said, he already bought the store, and he too analyzed his profit margin in each category and compared them to my suggestions that I've made in previous episodes. And I just did it again at the beginning of this episode, where I told you cigarettes should be in 15% margin to 17% margin. Beer is this, soda is that. I mean, I went through the list once again, but let's talk about his situation. And as I said, he found out there are only two categories that did not follow what I suggested. One was cigarette and one was automotive. But the problem is not automotive, because according to him, automotive only counts for 3% of the total sales, which is negligible. So we will not discuss automotive, but let's discuss cigarettes. He said 37% of his merchandise sales. He's making 5% margin compared to 17 or 15% that he should have been making. So he's down by 10% at least on cigarettes. And we cannot ignore that, because it's such a huge percentage of your sales. 37% of your sales are coming from just cigarettes, where you're only making 5%. So every $100 that you sell of cigarettes, you're only making $5 instead of $15. You see the difference? It's a huge difference. Like every time you're selling $100 worth of cigarettes, somebody's taking away a $10 bill out of your pocket. So it's a lot of money. Typically, in most convenience stores and gas stations, cigarettes carry around 20 to 40% of the total sales. And when I say total sales, I'm not including fuel, so don't get confused. But the lower this number is, the better off you are. If you can find a store that only has 20% of its total sale in cigarettes, I would look in that store or at that store more carefully compared to a store with a high sales volume but sells 40 or 50% sales are coming from just cigarettes, because that's, to me, is a red flag. Because as we know, cigarette profit margin has been in decline for many, many years. Back in the 90s, we used to make 25% on cigarettes. And gradually, slowly, it has been coming down. And even though I try to keep 15%, but I will admit there are stores that I'm associated with where our cigarette profit margins are down to about 12. At least one store has 12%. So I know that this is a squeeze that we're all facing, but it should not be at 5%. You can hardly find gas stations, convenience stores that are selling cigarettes at such a low price where they're only generating 5% profit margin. You may find a tobacco store somewhere that's very aggressive, because they don't have fuel to bring people in. So they bring in people with their aggressive pricing, but they only offer that cheap price for anybody that wants to buy a whole carton of cigarette, not a pack, because in pack, you're supposed to charge higher. So whichever way you look at it, 5% is not something you can live with, and you should not. So there are things that can be done and that should be done to increase that percentage. And let's talk about that. Okay, but in his case, I did not ask him for his total sales of his store, but let's do an hypothetical analysis of his sales. And you will understand if I put those in a dollar amount, it will be easier for everybody to understand. So let's say his store sales are $70,000 a month. If you take 37% of that sales, which is $25,900 just in cigarettes, at 5% margin, he's making $1,295. This is a serious problem, of course. So let's assume he's making 30% combined gross profit on the rest of the category. And don't be alarmed when I say 30% on the rest of the category, because you may argue that all along I've been saying 22, 23, 24%. Why am I saying 30 here? Because I'm taking cigarette out of the equation. So when you take a low profit margin item out of the equation, the rest of them go up. So that's why rest of them, let's assume at 30% margin. So at $70,000 sales minus $25,900, which is his cigarette sales. Rest of the departments or categories, he sold, let's say, $44,000 worth of merchandise besides cigarettes. And at 30% margin, he made $13,230 without cigarettes, plus $1,295 for that cigarette sales. So his combined gross profit in all categories comes out to $14,525. Typically, when gross profit is this low, it is hard to meet all your fixed and variable expenses and still make a profit. So once again, before you buy a business, make sure you check episode number 40 and 41, where I spoke at length about doing proper due diligence. In a nutshell, remember to always check the sales versus purchase. Always. You need to see how much they're buying versus how much they're selling. If the seller tells you they're doing $70,000 worth of merchandise sales and they're selling 50,000 gallons of fuel, you want to check their records of actual sales documents like daily closeout papers that come out of the register every day. And don't look for what they prepare in their own computer as far as their bookkeeping, because you can alter those numbers very easily. Only thing you cannot alter is an invoice that comes from Coca-Cola or any other invoice coming from different companies, cigarettes and whatnot. And you cannot alter your sales data that comes out of your register every night or every morning for that matter. So those are the real numbers. And once you see this, you can see if there are potential problems. For example, like in this person C's case, he analyzed everything other than the profit margin. So if he would have calculated the profit margin like I explained here, he would have known that there are cigarettes at 5% instead of 15%. So going back to his issue, his gross profit actually is $14,525. And remember, he did not give me his sales figure. I assumed he's doing $70,000. And at that, he's making $14,525. But now let's look at his cigarette margin. If it was at 15% instead of 5%, how would this number change? So we again just changed the last part of the equation where he made $1,295 from his total cigarette sales, which were $25,900. And if we calculate that at 15%, instead of making $1,295, he would be making $3,885. So if I add that up to his total profit margin, his profit margin should have been right at $17,115. But actuality, he made $14,525. So the difference is $2,590, which is almost $2,600. See, this $2,600 didn't have to just disappear like this. So it's a serious problem, but it's not the end of the world. And I told him on the email that he needs to listen to this episode because he asked for my advice, and I said, I will give it to you over an episode because I want everybody else to understand that in case you end up in the same situation, don't think that's the end of the world because it could have been much worse. So all you have to do is take an approach that can cure and remedy this situation. And in this case, there are 6 steps that I would take if it was me. Let's say if it was me, how would I handle that? I would take a 6-step approach. Number 1, I would first go and check the competitor's profit margin on cigarettes. I'm sure every store has at least one or maybe more competitors. So first thing I would do is check on the competitor's pricing and their margin because I know my cost, so I know theirs. And I'll tell you in a second what to do after you check the prices, but let's go with that list again. Number 1, as I said, check on competitors' profit margin. Number 2, contact all 3 cigarette companies and their reps and renegotiate the contracts. If it's Philip Morris, see there are levels of contracts. And if you even go with their lowest level, I believe it is right now about 8 or 9%, which is something I don't recommend. But in the event you need to survive, you need to go there, which will still be better than making 5%. But again, I highly recommend against that. But still, if you get a contract, a good, decent contract that will give you some back-end money every month that can compensate for this huge, deeply discounted cigarette pricing. Number 3, raise prices in at least 3 different increments with long intervals in between. What do I mean by that? I mean, raise prices, don't go up. Let's say you're selling a pack of Marlboro for $5. And you know you're making only 5%, but to get to 5 to 15%, you need to go up to, let's say, $5.75. Don't jump to $5.75 at the first try. Instead, go to $5.09. And then month later or 6 weeks later, go to $5.19. And then maybe go to $5.29. Slowly, gradual. So people don't see it being a huge jump. A dime or a nickel is not as bad of a deal breaker as it would be if you go up by $1 or 75 cents. So be slow, but be steady. Also, number 4, run 2-pack or 3-pack, even a carton pricing special. For example, when you're raising prices, I have done that many, many times, and I still do. Let's say my cigarette price is at $5 and I want to go up to $5.09. So what I will do is I will go up to $5.09 and then I will start a 2-pack promotion or a 3-pack special deal where I would, if somebody comes in and says, hey, I just bought the cigarette yesterday at $5. Now you're charging me $5.09. My response is, hey, the cost has gone up, so we went up, but I can still honor the same price as long as you buy 3-pack. So I'm still giving them a quantity discount, but for single pack, I'm raising my prices. Number 5, run at least 2 other promotions on 2 other categories like beer or maybe soda. See, when you're selling cigarette at that low price, I'm sure people are coming in to buy just a cigarette from you. You need to make sure they are buying something else. So when they're coming to your store, make sure you make some other type of promotion visible so you can increase some other category sales. So in the event, for example, you have 99 cents 2-liter Coke. So in the event, your cigarette price has gone up from $5 to $5.29. that person that always bought it for $5 and now he's mad that he's raising the cigarette prices, he may still come to you thinking, hey, at least I'm getting a 99-cent Coke from this store, which I can't find anywhere else. So you see, you have to shift from cigarette to some other departments. And this way, it's pretty much, remember I gave this example a long time ago once, that it's like exercising and strengthening your muscles. If you have chronic back issue, a lot of the times doctors will tell you, do some back exercise so your back muscle can become stronger so you don't feel the pain anymore, because your muscles will be strong enough to handle some of this heavy lifting that you do time to time. So in this case, you're making some muscle stronger so it can handle the pressure that cigarette is putting on your profit margin. Number 6, start giving superior customer service and increase the wow factor. A lot of times people go to a store because the employees are so nice, because they behave so politely and professionally. And that's called the wow factor. And nowadays, most of the large chains are only concentrating on this thing, which is they call the wow factor. You need to wow the customer, where they would be like, I just came to buy a pack of cigarettes, but they treated me so nice that I feel like $1 million. So that is one other thing you can concentrate on. Make sure your employees look presentable, they are in uniform, and coach them to behave wonderfully. Meaning when somebody walks in, they ask them, how are you doing? How is your day going? And trust me, a simple question such as that can go a long way. So that's where you may need to make the difference. Customer service. Okay, and now I'm going to go back to the very first point, which I said I will be coming back to later. Check on competitors' margin. And in this case, I guarantee you, you will not find too many competitors that are doing 5% margin on cigarettes. And even if they are, or let's say one of them is, how far are they from you? What are the advantages of that place compared to yours? Or what are the disadvantages of that place compared to yours? You need to find all of those out. And then figure out how can you stand out from him or her so your place will become more desirable for people to stop. Let's say their store is limited in space, so they can run too many promotion or beer or soda or whatnot. Then bring in a pallet load of 2 liters, set it up in the middle of the store and put a big sign, 99 cents 2 liter. This way you get ahead of the game. You need to play the game better than that. So as I said, analyze your competitors. And if there is a person or a store that's doing at 5%, you need to raise your prices slowly, but at the same token, start doing other type of promotions. But I have a feeling that you're not going to find too many competitors doing 5% margin on cigarettes. So it could be that your seller intentionally reduced this price so they can show you a higher sales volume. There are people that are not that honest, and I'm not suggesting your seller was not, but I'm saying that there are sellers I've come across that reduce prices just to increase sales volume. So when you are looking at a store, my suggestion is look at the sales trend and see if you're asking for a whole year worth of sales, see if their cigarette margin back in last December was at 17% compared to this November, which is almost 11 months later, is around 5, 6, 7%. In that case, you need to see also the trend of sales. Were they doing, let's say, $5,000 on cigarettes a month? Now they're doing $10,000? Or has the sales increased as the percentage margin, profit margin, keeps going down? A lot of people do that so they can show high sales volume. So be careful about that and keep an eye out, because it's very easy to see that when you look at a sales trend, well, this store started doing, or first last year it did $70,000 a month, and now right before I buy it a year later, it's doing 90,000 a month. But overall profit margin went from 26% to 18%. Then you know there are some potential problems. So keep an eye out for that. And as I said, you need to check the episode about due diligence that I've spoken in length about 3 important things. One is, as I said, verify the actual sales. Number 2, verify the purchase, the invoices. And number 3, verify their profit margin by category. So these are the things that can reveal the whole story of a store. And once you're satisfied, then move on to the other part of the due diligence where you will be checking on their expenses, payroll, and a lot of other similar items. So you will know exactly what their fixed costs are and what their variable costs are. And this way you can draw your own conclusion and figure out a profit and loss all by yourself without looking at their profit and loss, because a lot of times a seller's profit and loss doesn't make much sense. And in my opinion, I never look at them. I make my own because I assume that I'm running the store. So these are my expenses and these are my profit margins. So how much would I make at the end of the month? That is what I look at. If you have any questions about this episode or any other, feel free to send me an email at shabbir@gasstationbusiness101.com, or you can post it on my Facebook group. You can find my Facebook group by going to shabbirhossain.net. It's a domain redirect that will take you to my Facebook group. Lastly, if you're about to buy a gas station for the first time, make sure to read my book, Gas Station Business Smart Startup, where I talk about how to measure profitability, how to come up with a valuation, how to calculate return on investment, how to write a business plan, and how to get financing for your new venture. You can find this book on most all retailers, including Amazon, iTunes, Kobo, Smashwords, and Barnes & Noble. And for all my foreign listeners, if you're interested in learning about investment category visas and how to get one of those by investing in a gas station business, you can check out my new book called USA Investment Visa to Green Card, How to Qualify, Apply, and Obtain EB-5 visa, E2 visa, and L1 visa. You can also find this book on Amazon, and I'm about to publish it on Kobo and Apple and Barnes & Noble as well. So you can find it pretty much in all of the online retailers. Don't forget to sign up for my very important newsletter. And on that note, I need to apologize to everybody because I'm having some serious problem transitioning from an old email server to a new one where I'm paying quite a bit of money every month, but I still couldn't transfer the whole thing where it would be all automated. Remember, I told everybody that there will be a sequence of 7 emails that are very important for every gas station business owner to read. And I haven't had a chance to get that started. I only sent sequence number 1 3 months ago. And since then, I started switching over to the new email server and I haven't been able to do that. And I still am trying to hire somebody who will do this conversion and the transfer for me. So hopefully I will get it done in next week or 2 because I'm adamant to get it done and I'm putting a top priority on this project. So once again, don't forget to sign up for my newsletter, and you can simply do so by going to gasstationbusiness101.com/subscribe. As I said, you will be receiving a lot of valuable information through that newsletter, and it's all free. I will not try to sell you anything. I will not charge you anything. Once again, thank you for joining me in this episode, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.
This has been the one and only Gas Station Business 101 podcast with your host, Shabbir Hossain. This podcast was brought to you by CSB Academy Publishing Company. Be sure to join us next time as we share with you the secrets about how to start and operate a gas station business successfully and make money.